Hey, party people, we're about to get started. For me to put you on the spotlight, your camera's got to be on. So go ahead and turn those things on. Bam. We'll probably give it a couple minutes, 8:05-ish. I'm just gonna get everybody spotlight. I think that's everyone. Beautiful.
How you doing, Brian?
Vibing in the lab, running it up.
Living your best.
How are you, Ashley?
I am so good. I just hopped off. My school is also having their own post-match panel today, so I ditched them to come hang out with y'all here. Very excited about it.
So you're coming warmed up?
I am, yeah. I got my first few questions out of the way. Ready to really get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. Kristen, roll call. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm on inpatient medicine right now, so we're living a life.
Okay.
That I'm jumping, but my one piece of advice for rising fourth years, don't put anything during your month of March if you can avoid it. I was also on my sub-I in March in internal medicine rounding at 6 a.m. every day, and it was terrible.
I made a mistake.
Kristen
Susan.
knows this, but I put my vacation month as my last rotation. So I finished med school last week and it's been smooth sailing.
Oh, so jealous. Good for you.
Wow.
Thanks for rubbing that in there, Nantha.
Susan, how you doing? We didn't hear from you.
I'm doing well, thanks. I'm on palliative, so I'm getting up slightly early, but I'm really loving life right now. So sorry, Kristen.
We'll probably get started in 4 minutes or so, 8:05-ish. Make sure you got you a nice beverage beside you. Water, coffee, tea, liquor, whatever your preference is. Snacks, whatever you need to make this night a success.
I still have 2 weeks of I'm doing anesthesia, but I took a 1 week break after finishing my sub-I, and it is mostly being taken over by residency onboarding paperwork and paying the state of Illinois $200 so that I can be a doctor for them, which I'm not thrilled about. And then after my 2 weeks of anesthesia, I'll be done, which I am very, very thrilled about.
Just started anesthesia today, and I was like, "Yay, I don't care." And they were like, "You have to care." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So, yeah, but it's cool.
Is post-matcheritis a real thing?
Yeah, even like
100%.
pre-match.
Yo, this started for me like the day we submitted. Like, I've not been mentally present. You can pit me, and I'm like, I don't know.
That's my favorite thing when people are like, but what do you want to do? Or like, what's the answer to this? And it's like an I am question. And I'm like, well, in the ED, we would do this, but I don't know.
Yeah, I have all third years on my rotation, and they're like, I can just like smell that you don't care, but like you're not disrespectful. And I was like, if anything bad happens, you can blame it on me. It's cool. As long as it doesn't happen something bad to a patient, like it's cool. Everything's fine.
Facts. Seems like you have to allow yourself to be pimped.
Not if they like look at you and ask you. I don't know what
Actually,
you-
I'm actually at Christ right now. Fun fact.
Awesome. Very exciting.
What's Christ?
That's where I'm going for residency, Brian.
Okay. Well, this is, I'm the host, and I think it's great that I'm the host because I know the least amount about EM. I'll be asking the questions that the folks in attendance want to know. Where is Christ located?
It is in Oak Lawn, south of Chicago.
Okay.
Do you want that to segue us into intros?
Yeah, I think it's about that time. We 8:04 by my watch. But honestly, I think you should take the most time, Ashley.
I don't have a lot in terms of introduction, but I can get us started. I'm
Read your
Ashley.
CV.
I don't want to do that. I'm up past that, as we've already talked about. Post-match, living the life. I'm Ashley. I am from the suburbs of Chicago originally. I went to Loyola Stritch out in Maywood for medical school, and I matched at Advocate Christ, which is a community program on the south side of Chicago, a 3-year program.
And popcorn somebody for us.
All right, I'll pop it over to Kirsty.
Hey everyone, I'm Kirsty. I'm out in California, which is raining, super strange, and everyone's talking about it. It's crazy. The whole hospital is like, "Did you see it's raining?" Like people are freaking out. I'm in LA, but I'm actually moving for residency. I matched into a county program in New Orleans, LSU New Orleans, and I'm very excited. And yeah, happy to be here.
Who are you gonna popcorn?
I already messed it up. Susan.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan. I go to St. Louis University in Missouri. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I matched at UC Irvine in California. So I will popcorn over to Anantha.
Hi, my name is Anantha, like Samantha. I'm originally from Southern California, but I go to school in Lincoln Memorial University in East Tennessee, and I matched back in Southern California at a 3-year community program in Eisenhower, which is near Palm Springs.
Last but not least, I'm Kristen. I am originally from Colorado, and I go to Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine. I matched at UNLV.
Okay. We've gotten to know our panelists and where they've matched. My name is Brian Redmond, MD PhD student at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. I'll be your host tonight, hopefully facilitating some good post-match vibes. Our panelists, as I have prepped them via email, are open books. They have no choice but to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I think we, love to begin with, what is the post-match vibe like? How are you feeling? What are you doing? How do you spend your time? What are you watching on TV? Take us away.
I think I can speak for all of us when I say it's amazing. The week before match, like at my actual match ceremony, it was like an hour long of like the deans talking at us while we're standing there waiting to open our envelopes. And that was the worst time of my life. I remember looking down as like a first year being like, oh my God, they're all having so much fun. And then I was the 4th year looking up at them like, this is terrible. I'm going to throw up. But then as soon as you open your envelope and find out where you're going, everything after that is amazing and perfect. And you get to start your little chat with all your incoming co-residents and start like being weird with each other, and everything's really fun. So good vibes, good vibes.
So I'll add to that, especially because she talked about right before, and I'm one of the people that dual applied. So little known fact that Monday they don't tell you like the specialty you match into. So everyone's like, I'm gonna be a Dr. X, and I'm like, I don't know what kind of doctor I'm gonna be. So for me, pre-match day was, I wouldn't say bad, but when I heard about the 219 unfilled spot, it became bad because I was like, what if blah 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 blah. So anyways, I matched my first choice though, so it was great. I think that I walked through like a shock phase for a while. Like I kept having to recheck my emails to make sure it wasn't a lie, or like not even, and I'm not an anxious person. It was just like the like goal was so big that it was like hard to digest. I don't know if anyone else had that, but it like, I could not process it in the way that I knew, like my life had not given me the skills. So I was really happy, but I was like so shocked for days. getting a massage was nice after, just like treating yourself, like doing whatever you want because it doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters. And you're just happy and it's great. Yeah.
And just kind of adding on there, something that I did not realize that experience was just like a bunch of emotions because, you know, you apply to all these places, you interview all these places, and you start to create this different scenario for every place you interviewed at. And when you do match, you kind of kiss goodbye to all those other places and all those other versions of your life. And I felt a ton of those emotions and didn't realize what I was feeling until I saw it on Med Twitter. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I'm feeling. So be prepared for that. And major senioritis once you find out where you matched. So we were talking about this earlier, but I finished up my rotations last week and definitely gave 0 FSAT for that. And definitely plan your schedule accordingly because afterward, you just want to house hunt and start thinking about vacations and July 1st. And really, you don't want to think about ICU and being a student anymore.
That's a really good point, though. I wrote down like things that I liked about every program in my top 10, top 15, whatever I ranked, and reasons why like I would be happy going there and people I connected with, who I was excited to work with and all of that, just so that no matter where you end up falling, you have something to look to being like, I liked this program when I interviewed there. I'm going to be happy there. Like I'm going to be well trained, all of those things.
A lot of consensus around like there's a little bit of anxiety pre-match, a lot of relief / matchitis post-match, matcheritis. I want to lob another question because I want to make sure we're using our time efficiently and that folks in the audience get to ask some too. Susan and Kristen, what if you two kind of take the lead on this one? What did you like about the application process? What didn't you like? And what would you change?
Application process is definitely can feel very overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff that you have to get done, kind of like feels like all at once. And so definitely like the first part, I mean, even end of 3rd year and going into the first part of 4th year, like there's all these different deadlines and you have to get letters of recommendation from, like, you're literally hunting down physicians to get your letters of recommendation. And you're like, why don't you just answer my email and do this? So like there's some stressors for it, but like, you know, kind of echoing the excitement of getting to kind of think about your life in all these different places. And so that can be really exciting. It can also be really different when you have partners as well, because, you know, you not only are looking at your goals and like what you're doing, but if your partner's in medicine as well, thinking about going in couple matching, or if your partner is not in medicine and they have to like uproot their career and follow you somewhere, you're like picking these places where you're like, oh, well, like I really like this area of the country and this program, but now I have to kind of cater over here. So it's just a lot of planning. And my biggest advice is just take a bite of the buffalo, just a little bit of a time, and eventually you will swallow it.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that people don't really talk about is that it's like a new anxiety or a new stressor like every few months. So like first you're worried about AWAYS, and then you're worried about completing ERAS. And, you know, what if someone doesn't upload something, and then you're stressed about, am I going to get any interviews? Have I gotten enough? And then you get to the point you're like, oh, maybe I do or don't have enough. Like, what should I do? Should I apply to more? Things like that. And then you're worried about making your rank list. So I think I agree. It's like, take it all one step at a time. And it's so hard. And I am one of the first people who will tell you, I try to plan everything in advance. I would say literally take it one step at a time, one day at a time, and try not to think about those following steps as best you can. Because you'll get there, it'll be fine, you know. But especially, I think I gave myself, and I think some of my friends as well, like we gave ourselves so much grief, where maybe if we had taken it a little bit more one step at a time, it would have been a little bit of a better process. I think also the personal statement, totally, like I'm an English major and I had somewhat of a rough time. Highly recommend reaching out to mentors. And even if you know a PD or two, like reach out to them and say, what do you look for? What are things like, I was told explicitly, don't write a story about a patient because it's very cliche. Some people don't like it anymore. So when you're prepping stuff like that, like getting advice from especially like where you want to go, or if anyone has posted about it, stuff like that. That was very helpful for that process.
And while we're speaking on the subject of applications, Ashley has been instrumental in instituting some changes in the application process. She dropped a spoiler of this change in the chat. And I want to give her the opportunity to chat about that.
Yeah, don't come for me. I was not the maker of this decision. But a lot of EM organizations came together this year alongside CORD, and they decided that they're going to move forward with instituting preference signaling for next year's application cycle. So I think they landed on 5. Everyone who applies into EM will get 5 tokens, and you submit them alongside your initial ERAS application to theoretically your top 5 programs, and they should kind of highlight you as an applicant who's very interested in their program, make it maybe more likely that you're going to get an interview there, whether you're, a lower quartile applicant or an upper quartile applicant, just kind of like showing your interest in programs. They're supposed to be used as initial application screening tools so that programs can filter in students who are extremely interested, supposed to help cut down on interview congestion, supposed to be like a really fair, equitable process because everyone gets the same number and they all have the same weight. So you don't have to rank 1 through 5. It's just, these are my top 5 programs that I would really love to get an interview from. So that's preference signaling. I'm sure so much more information is going to come out in terms of advising, techniques on how to give out those 5 tokens that you get, et cetera. And then the new SLO, I actually don't have a ton of information. I heard about it for the first time today because post-match, as we've been talking about, is this glorious place where nothing matters anymore. And so I don't have a ton of information about what's changing in the SLO, but I would definitely recommend looking at it once it becomes available, which I'm pretty sure is going to be tomorrow, just to look at what did change, because obviously those are going to be the components that you're going to want to really shine on in your EM rotations. And so knowing what's in the form and what they're actually grading you on is super clutch once you're going into those rotations.
I'm glad you brought up rotations because we just dropped the quick roll call poll, and it seems like over 40% of those who responded want to know the tips and tricks on killing that rotation. I want to invite Anantha to kind of share some perspective on how you succeeded on your rotation in EM.
Yeah, so I was reading through some of the pre-submitted questions. And I know people are talking about what if I have red flags, what if I have low scores? Your away rotations are big in EM. You get a good SLO, you are set for getting your interviews. So to get a good SLO, you need to come in and show them that you know what emergency medicine is, that you're willing to take on things, that you're willing to take initiative, and that you're willing to learn. The biggest advice everyone tells you is you want to be that person that they can count on at 3 a.m., that they want to talk to. They don't want someone who's boring or someone who just is super studious and doesn't want to have fun. They want to see both sides of you and they want to see that energy. So going in and saying, can I go see this patient? Or being able to present right away. There is a video, I think on the SAM website on like a 5-minute presentation on how to present very quickly. If you come in on your rotations in June, July, and show them that right off the bat that you know what you're doing and this is not just for shits and giggles, then really you will impress them off the bat, and if you show that you grow from day 1 to day 30. So big things, but your SLOs are so key. They will take away a lot of the red flags in your applications.
Yeah, I'll jump in as well and say that I would highly recommend, like, when you go in, you're not just, I mean, you are a student, but you're not just the student. You take ownership of your patients. I will say that the best times that I got good feedback was when I was like, this is my patient, this is what we're going to do, and tell me if we need to correct it. It's just a different way of thinking. I think third year, you're supposed to be a little more like, I don't know what the word is, but like, oh, can we maybe do this? Where EM is like, just, I want to do this, this, and this for these reasons. And like update your patients. You know, you should not, like, at no point should anyone know more information about your patient than you do. Like the attending should be like, oh, did that come back? And you'll be like, yes, no, whatever. So I would say also that really, really helps away rotations and for you to stand out, because I think it's very hard to do.
I think kind of piggybacking on that is that a lot of people get very obsessed with quantity over quality. And so something that people can kind of trip up on is that, you know, they pick up like 5 patients like all at once. And no, like you pick them up as you can. And like, you're not going to be able to have like the same sort of like quality, like intensive, like I know everything about this patient. I have updated them on everything. I've updated my attending on everything about this patient on multiple people. And if you build up to that over the rotation, that is awesome. However, like just make sure that you are actually like making sure you're getting your charting done and they're not hounding you down at the end of it, making sure that like you're actually able to follow up on these things, because if you're just picking up everyone in the department, then you're not actually like providing them with quality work so they can be like, wow, that person like did a really good job like comforting like that patient, and they remember that about you. So just make sure to like don't get so caught up in numbers. One thing that I did do on a couple of my rotations is I did try to like feel out where should I be at, because you don't want to be like so far behind that you're like, I only saw 1 patient my whole shift. Like, don't be that person. But like just kind of feeling out, okay, like what should my goal be of like patients per shift, and just kind of like working up towards that as you become more comfortable within the department. Your first day on an away rotation is stressful and like nerve-wracking. Like don't like beat yourself up, but like ease yourself into it so that your quality is better. That is going to get you the best kind of slow.
And we've been speaking about rotations and slows. There actually was a mention by Anantha about red flags. I wanted to pose this question to you all, and maybe Kirsty, you can start us off. You talked about like matching, and I guess this is applicable to everyone. Were you surprised when you learned that you matched? And if you were surprised or not surprised, could you identify any red flags that were in your own application?
Yeah, sure. So I was expecting to match just statistically. So once you hit certain numbers, and I had jobs previously, so like I thought I interviewed pretty well. Like I don't get too nervous, and I did some interview prep with the school or whatever, and so I had a good feeling. I would have been surprised if I had matched, but I was still, of course, up at 6 a.m. when it like came. Like I was like not able to sleep the night before. I was so excited and thought there was a little chance of like worry or whatever, but no, that was all good. I think sometimes we perceive things as red flags. So for example, I took a year off to have a kid, and that was a choice that was really good for me and really good for my family, and I didn't want my education to suffer. So I was kind of like we had talked about the theme, the quantity quality type thing. So only in my 4th year did I realize that other people also noticed that was okay. Because before you have all these like anticipations of like how people are going to see you, or predictions of like, oh, they're going to like notice this instead of this. No one asked me about the things I was worried they were going to ask me about. And when they asked me about like the year off, it was always brought up in a really good context. And it never made me uncomfortable like I was worried about it. I never felt, I will never know, let's say, if I got less interviews because of it, but at the same time, I got great interviews. And like one of my mentors even told me, they were like, so you have the maturity to make that decision because that's what you needed. Like, that's a good thing. And so I was like, oh, I never thought about it like that, like in the context of medicine, because you only think about what you're not sometimes when you're trying to head towards applications, I think. So other than that, I had some, let's say, like great things first year that like I had worried about first year, but turns out no one cares. Like they care about clinicals. They care about if you're able to hold a conversation. They care about slows. They care about boards. So kind of the thing. So stop hyper focusing. I do know of a friend of mine that did have a bigger red flag than an actual red flag. And one of the ways that she dealt with it, and I thought it was great, she actually got a service to help her write her personal statement so she could like craft her story in a way that addressed that, but also made it a positive. And she matched her first choice. So I just always throw that out there on these sessions, because there are services, even friends, that will help you. But if you feel like, oh, there's a red flag, there are people that help you craft that statement. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was a really good response. And you know, if anyone wants kind of a scaffold to begin their response, in the chat, folks are talking about, you know, EM EM evaluations, step 1 and step 2 scores. And if you all have tips on how to circumvent those conversations in the interview and application process.
Yeah, I can totally take this. So full disclosure, I don't care anymore because I've matched, so who cares? My scores, both step 1 and step 2, were sub 220s, like no joke. And it was not the worst score in the world, but it was definitely really low. I actually had a mentor who was like, if I thought you were going to do badly in your like clinicals and like on your ways, I would tell you not to apply to EM. So it's one of those things where EM is somewhat about scores. Like my scores definitely took me out of the running for a bunch of schools, and I know that. I applied to some of them anyways, but you know, I kind of walked in like I knew it was going to be a little bit harder. But what I will say is that the slow makes so much of a difference. And especially what I noticed too, like everyone asked me about like I got asked more about my love for UFC than my scores. So like if you, I won't say you have to be like this super interesting person, but if you can say, hey, you know what, like what I told people was like, I'm not a test taker. I'm better clinically. That's just how I am. So the people who like the programs who were interviewing me, I think wanted that holistic person. And I was like, I'm going to pass my boards. I know that I can do it. I just not going to be 99th percentile, and that's fine. So I would say that like some programs, especially if you're shooting for like top 10, whatever, they probably are going to care a little more about the score. But the biggest thing is like making sure your slow is rock solid. And that's going to be one of your biggest helps. I think also I agree, crafting your story to be a positive. Like I very much emphasized like my clinical interests, and like I speak Spanish and I'm half Mexican. So for me, like that was a much bigger part of my story than my scores. So definitely like kind of I feel like you have to just figure out who you are and what you want to bring to the table, and then brag about yourself all day long.
No, just to very quickly echo that, I feel like once you get your foot in with an interview, those kind of more metric type questions disappear and you become kind of in the pool of applicants that they're very highly considering. And you can kind of hang your hat on the fact that, hey, I'm good enough to get an interview. They like me. They just want to know more about me. And then you can be yourself and figure out if that program is going to be somewhere that's going to train you well and somewhere you're going to be happy. But yeah, you can work through your application and frame things in a lot of different ways and highlight other areas if some areas aren't so strong, just to get yourself in the door. And then once you're there is when like the real decisions start to happen of if you are a really good match for the program or not.
And like Susan said, you know, if you need to bring up your red flags, you totally can, but that's not what makes all of you. You have so many strong parts. So it does very little to really highlight your red flags. You want to brag on yourself. You want to highlight all your strengths. And I can tell you, none of my interviews asked about my scores or my GPA. We talked about my hobbies. We talked about Harry Potter. We talked about my involvement in EM, and we talked about the slows. So those are the important things. No one really cares about anything else. So really highlight what makes you, you, and what you can bring to the program.
I love those responses. I think medical schools in themselves, the curriculum is shifting to focus on the patient holistically, and the review process should be no different. And I think those in attendance, you know, folks who are worried about scores and you know the application process, the people on this call right now will be shifting the norm. They'll be the folks making decisions and interviewing future applicants and giving their 2 cents. And if you can't tell, you know, there's a change being made in the evaluation process. And I think it's for the better. It's to support the applicant. We had a question about research. Did anyone do research? Was it EM focused? Do you think you need EM research to chat about research in your application? Share your sentiments. Maybe we'll start. I saw a hand from Susan and Ashley and Kristen. There's 3 hands right there. Let's start with Susan.
Yeah, so I did, I would say, a moderate amount of research. I worked on a curriculum for like Breaking Bad News, which mixes palliative and EM. That was like my big thing. also did some anesthesia research, but that was like really random. My point is that I think research can help. I would say that do only what you can, like don't say yes to everything. You're going to get way too overwhelmed. And then also, if you're not passionate about it or like it's not really interesting, I wouldn't necessarily do it, because they will ask you about it, and they'll if you're, I think it's very clear if you're like, oh, I don't know, like I think we did this, you know, it looks bad. So I would say if you're going to do it, pick one or two solid things, and if more if you can, but kind of keep it more into like your interests, and something that you're willing to talk about on interviews.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Most of my research, and again, I didn't do a ton, like a retrospective chart review and a survey study, focused around addiction medicine and the intersection between that and emergency medicine. I think research can be a great way for you to show the things that you're interested, especially if it's some of those subspecialty areas of EM, like EMS, toxicology, ultrasound, et cetera. And it came up a ton on my interviews, but more along the lines of, why did you want to do this research? Is it something you're considering like continuing in residency? Are you considering a fellowship? Those kind of questions, which I definitely was. And that's why I think it's so important to do research in an area that you're passionate about so that you can talk about it and show your interest in it and show why that makes you a unique applicant. But it's totally not necessary. It doesn't have to be EM. I think it's just a good way to show your passions.
Kristen, did you want to share anything about research?
I think so. There's like 3 different flavors of emergency medicine programs that you'll encounter, and then like even some hybrids. And I did feel like the academic places that I applied to like did have a larger pool of applicants who they had accepted who tended to have like higher numbers of research. So that was just something that like I noticed like when I was like making this big like scheme of places I wanted to go, like I definitely looked at like, okay, well, how do my numbers look compared to all these people? And you can see that trend, but again, like it doesn't mean it's not like impossible to go to those places. I just traditionally like county programs or community programs are like, we care a lot about your community involvement. And you can definitely still see that some academic programs still care a lot about the paper pushing. So just it depends on the flavor, I think.
And my perspective might be a little bit different because I really like research a lot. Being a big research advocate, I will say that almost any project can take an EM spin because the emergency room is a melting pot for pathology and life. And you know, whether you're doing epi research or looking at a protein channel and an organism that a lot of people probably can't pronounce, you can probably give it an EM spin and sell yourself with that research. I also would say that the rigor required to produce good research and the discipline and the consistency, the attention to detail, the ability to stay up late at night and not make mistakes. These are all qualities that I think make a good EM physician. So if you're not selling the hypothesis, you know, the abstract, the conclusion and discussion, I saw some people respond to the poll about wanting information on finesse. This is where you sell the finesse, you know, those attributes of research that are transferable to work in the emergency department. And I would certainly be remiss. I am a shameless plug. The Scientific Assembly is around the corner. If you're interested in research, shameless plug, right? I'm like a walking billboard. If you're interested in research, if you want to connect with folks who like to do research, I dropped the link in the chat. Scientific Assembly, we're putting a science in Scientific Assembly this year. In Search of Research is a part of the medical student track. We're trying to put together a list, a server, a directory, if you may, of people who do research and would love to connect with emergency medicine interested students. So if you're in search of research, and I like how that rolls off the tongue, be sure to connect with us at Scientific Assembly. Ashley will be a key facilitator of programming at Scientific Assembly. So if you especially love to hear from Ashley, make sure you register. We want to see your face. I'm gonna be there. Kirsty gonna be there. You know, Anantha might be there, you know, after hearing that advertisement, you know, it sells itself. We got another question here.
Really, Brian, can I add one thing about
Yeah,
the
go
research
ahead.
thing? I want to say something positive too about it is that I did multiple studies of different like study design. And I always like to be able to say, if I were asked, to be like, well, I want to be the type of physician that's not scared of using research for my patients and to like get boots on the ground experience. I wanted to go through different types of studies so that I learned firsthand how to look at these studies. So that's another way you can kind of spin it to be like, I want to like empower myself to have the tools to be able to like use evidence-based medicine. That's why, even if you're not planning on doing research or fellowship, or you're like, I never want to do research again, you can still see that type of spin. Cool.
Tell them you're an up-to-date wizard, a demigod,
Yeah.
and their research prepared you. You know, you're a walking meta-analysis. That stuff is invaluable. And if, you know, this is, I hope a lot of people, you know, I know cameras aren't on, but I hope you are slapping your knee to these research jokes. I sure am. I would be remiss.
Brian, can I say one more thing? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm so sorry. You mentioned Scientific Assembly, and I feel so strongly about this. If you can go to conferences, go to these conferences. Networking is big as an EM. Susan and I were medical student ambassadors at AEM last year. Great experience. You meet a lot of mentors. Those are the mentors you're going to review your personal statement, help you narrow down your school list, who will help you with those connections when you need them. I met Kristen and Ashley at the conference. Kristen hooked me up with someone who helped me when I was trying to find housing for an away rotation in Chicago. You will meet people who will help you during this entire application cycle. So go to these conferences if you can. Super passionate about that.
You know, I could talk about research all day. I got a poster board behind me. That is my favorite thing to discuss. But I want to certainly get to every aspect that has been mentioned, especially via the poll and some of the questions that have been submitted. There was a very particular question about aways and deciding where you want to do aways. Is there some strategy you all would like to share about how you did that? I see Kirsty with a hand up already. Take it away.
So I was one of those people where location was less of a factor. I lived in San Francisco and LA. So my husband just said, like, please no New York City, because that would have hit all of the most expensive places to live in the United States. So that was the only limitation I had. So my mentor told me it feels really overwhelming. So what you should do is choose like 5 or 10 in each region and like figure out like just to narrow your list and then start applying from like your first to your whatever last choice of those. Like look at things like things that were important to me is if they had like strong social EM tendencies, whether or not that mentioned like, I don't know, underserved, social determinants of health, or just had a social EM area, global health. Like, so those are the ways I like looked at those. And like county and community kind of interests me, but I didn't rule out academic. So if you're open to location, you can plan your aways and like go in batches. And I've heard this also when I was a third year that like, if you get like, I got a rotation in Chicago, then the Midwest sees that you may be interested in the Midwest, you know, that's like the idea. So I didn't do 2 Midwest rotations. I did like Midwest and then like East Coast or Midwest and South. That's one of the ways, because all of my application looked California. So that was one tip I got. That helped. It seemed like less daunting and overwhelming.
I specifically applied for an away at Cook County here in Chicago because I kind of knew it was like a big mecca in the EM field. And so I was like, I have to get a slow, because I felt like I was a very like average applicant, but that slow seriously like put me at programs that I never even thought I would get an interview at. And they specifically brought up the slow from that program. So doing in a way somewhere that you can get a letter of recommendation from that like has one of those names that you can kind of like slap over there is super helpful, especially if you're like, oh, like, I don't really know about like my application being like super, board strong or like research strong or any of that stuff. I definitely feel like my letter of recommendation from a strong, well-known program was kind of what made my application, especially because it got brought up multiple times. And so picking, first of all, doing that. Secondly, I did it in a way in like the middle of interview season. And like they were kind of like weirded out because they were like, oh, most people do aways like, June, July, like, before everything starts. But I did it in the middle of interview season specifically to get an interview there, which like, it's kind of fun because not everybody realizes that if you're already there and they see you like working like super hard, they're like, this person's awesome. Like, I want to interview them. And so like, that's another thing to kind of consider too. So like, if you want to go to a program, it doesn't matter that you don't get the July spot. Like you can still like apply to do an away like in December and be there in the middle of interview season and be like, hi, I snuck in, love me. Now you see my work. So it's a secret method that I did.
Especially since I think y'all can do more away rotations than we were allowed to do. So yeah, take advantage of it.
Any other sentiments on away rotations before we move to what might be a rather personal question, I think. Let's get personal.
I've not had enough liquor for this tonight.
Yeah, you it's not too late. It's not too late. We know what's in the Ashley's cup. This right here, I think is what people really want to know. They want to know, what should they expect in the interview? I want you to respond to these two questions. Number one, what question really, really surprised you / was most difficult to answer? And number two, what question do you think was most common? And don't tell us why EM. Tell us the question that you feel like really was the one that was like, I've been answering this a whole lot. I'm glad I got a great response prepared.
In addition to the why EM question, ones I think I got very frequently were just like the standard tell me about yourself. Usually the first question, have like a good 3-sentence something response to it that explains what you want to emphasize and what you want to talk about from your application or something that's not on your application. I got asked a lot, and this is more program specific, but like, what do you want out of a program? And then you kind of have to tailor that question to the program that you're interviewing at and make it fit into why you would do well there, why they have what you're looking for. And then another pretty common one is just where you see yourself in a few years. Do you see yourself going into teaching or working in an academic institution, or I interviewed at a lot of county programs. So, do you see yourself doing a fellowship after, or are you going to stay working in a county program? Things like that. Those were my probably most common questions. The one that stumbled me the most during my interview season, I think this is probably just because it was in like my last interview and I was tired and done with answering questions, was they were just like, take the next 3 minutes and teach me about something. And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't know if I should go like I don't know, like pathophysiology of the lung route or like something. I ended up talking about cooking. So yeah, that was probably the one that surprised me the most. Like, you'll get a lot of the more weird questions in your resident socials than I would say during actual interview days. But if anyone else has any weird interview question stories, I love to hear those. Those are my favorite to talk about.
I will say there's a tab now. Okay, I don't recommend using the spreadsheet almost ever. The only, like, it drives you crazy, I promise. But what I thought was really helpful is there's a whole list of questions that people have been asked, and there's weird ones. Like, I don't think this is this didn't actually happen, but like types of like, tell me what kind of cookie you would be, or like, tell me about like just weird things that you just are kind of supposed to throw you off. Just review that list. That's the only thing I think this spreadsheet I would recommend using it for. Because it gives you a really good sense of like how other people answered or like what types of questions you might get asked. And then I think the most common, I alluded to it earlier, but like literally every interview asked me why I liked UFC and like if that was a real, like they were like, tell me about it. And so I would talk about it for 5 minutes and they were like, oh, you actually like it. So I highly, highly recommend if you have a hobby or something that you're interested in that you can talk about easily and like get excited about, I would put it down. I know people disagree. I don't think it's supposed to be professional, like, don't put anything weird, like, really out there, but just random stuff. Like if you have a sourdough starter that you've had for 5 years, like, I don't know, stuff like that can be kind of cool. So
Any other sentiments about EM interview processes, things that surprised them in the interview?
I was exhausted. Like I'm a little bit more of an introvert, so like I have a little bit lower people pennies at baseline, and I did not anticipate being that like fatigued at the end of the day. I feel like what I did, there are a couple of different ways you can approach setting up your interviews. A lot of interviews for EM come out and that like kind of like initial spread. I think like what was it, like October 12th this last year? Somebody correct me because I don't know if that's a correct. Yeah, so like a good chunk of EM programs signed on to this collective thing saying we are not going to release interviews until this day, just to kind of let everybody get their, eggs in their baskets. And so that they could also have a more like holistic or like approach. But I ended up putting a lot of my interviews like kind of scattered throughout the season, like all the way up until February, because I wanted to have those breathers. And if I didn't have those breathers, like I had friends who like just only interviewed in November, and like I interviewed for like 4 days straight and like was not a human at the end of it, because it just feels like you're like on point, like, hi, I'm a little pretty princess. And it's hard, like it does take a toll. So like if you're somebody who like doesn't have a lot of people pennies, like consider like it's okay if you spread out your interviews. Like you don't have to, there's no such thing as if I interview in November, they're gonna want me more. Like that's BS. It's okay if you interview at any time during the interview process. And if you're somebody who needs that like space to breathe, it's okay to schedule them out. The only problem with that though, also your friends get done with their interviews and you're still sitting there on a camera. So pros and cons.
But Zoom fatigue is so real. Kristen's so right. I interviewed on a stretch of interviews and like that week I couldn't do anything else. You're not human afterward. You got smiling, the ring lights, all that. You're so happy when you're done with it. In terms of questions, tell me about yourself. People say that you need to rehearse it beforehand. I didn't. I was just like, let's go into this first interview and see what happens. And then they seemed to like that there were some natural pauses in there versus me rehearsing it. So that was good. They asked me, what are you most proud of? That kind of threw me off the first time. But once I started realizing that I had a good answer, that's what I would use a lot. And that came up a ton. And what threw me off is I mentioned this in the chat. I only did research in undergrad. It was one research study. It was published. It was years ago. And they brought it up, and I could talk a little bit about it, but then someone asked me a specific question about my methods and it threw me off. And I was like, I should have reread that paper last night. So again, if you put something in there, be ready to defend it thoroughly. And it was like a psych research study on babies. So I did not realize they would go in depth about that. And then I was going to say something else. Oh, interviews. Yes. Stretch them out all the months. I got my last interview invite in January. I thought I was done. I was going to celebrate. And then I got another one for February at the first week. So if you're not at your number, don't fret about it. Don't compare yourself to other people. Beef is like the comparison to joy.
Love it. Love it. We have a question from an IMG, an international medical graduate. What would you all say, best practice, best pieces of advice from IMG to be competitive enough in the application process?
So I have very limited knowledge on this, but one of my friends is an IMG, didn't do EM, unfortunately, but or actually, no, did do EM. Excuse me. Oh my goodness, I'm getting everybody mixed up now. One thing that they did that seemed very helpful was double checking, like, and even triple checking what the visa status is for each institution. That way you're not applying to places that, like, what he was saying was that there are some places that will explicitly say they don't accept or don't sponsor certain types of visas. So if you're in a situation where you have a certain type of visa, make a list of the ones that do support that. And I think, I don't know if anyone would agree with this. I've also heard of looking at the past couple years of alumni and current residents and seeing how many of them are interim, like IMGs. But that's about as far as I know.
And jumping off that, even if you don't see an IMG in that class, doesn't mean you can't be the first. It's the same with us DO students. So don't go in, compare and go, oh, this program's not for me because there's not a single IMG. A plug, AEM's Women in EM section has an IMG mentorship series that they do monthly. So that is also a great resource since we can't really speak to that personally.
Yeah, I said this in the chat, but I'll echo it too. If anyone is an IMG and has more questions, reach out to me or anyone on the panel and they can direct it to me or anyone else and we can get you hooked in with people who know a lot more about it than we do.
And I really want to, remind you all the chat is open. Would love to get you all's questions. We got a question in the chat right now. What would you guys recommend with scheduling rotations during interview season? Did you like scheduling lighter rotations during certain months and whatnot? How did you kind of organize yourself?
Yeah, if you can do chill rotations, but that doesn't mean you can't have a hard rotation and not expect them to understand you have interviews. So when I did both, because I mean I did the October through end of January like interviews, and I even also be prepared for a dry spell, which will freak you out because you get maybe like a rush in the beginning, and then I was like, where'd they go? And then it like rushed at the end, so it was weird. Anyway, sorry. So I had a busy rotation and then I had quite a few interviews and they were very accommodating. Your school should have a policy on how many days you can miss, but even then, like, you can usually talk to them and they really want you to succeed. So it would be weird if they were like, well, you shouldn't take these off. They all have been there, so they should know that you need that time off for interviews. I don't know if anyone else had a different experience, but chill if you can.
I personally took the month of November off just because our school gives us 2 months of vacation. And so I decided to do that, which was helpful. But there were also some interviews that, like, when we were scheduling for M4, like, they would specifically state, like, we don't care if you have an interview, like, you only get this many days off. And maybe don't schedule that kind of interview. Like, talk to your M4s or talk to people, your upperclassmen, and just be like, yo, what was that rotation like if they did it? Because if they're like, yeah, they were a pain in the butt to, like, get a very basic human understanding from, avoid that.
And balance is really important, especially during interview season. The Zoom fatigue that's already been mentioned, the constant pupillary constriction from ring lights. It can be taxing on the body and the parasympathetics. So just be careful, guys, when it comes to the scheduling. We got like 8 minutes left for the panel. Make sure you're dropping those questions in there. We just got a really good one. One about ranking the importance of some of the key components of the application and the application process. Between rotation grades, Shelf 2 score, slows, networking. What do you guys think the hierarchy is?
So slow, like slow for a while. And then I would say, personally, I think that, I don't know, I feel like networking is up there. I think like like your rotation grades are pretty much the bottom, like as long as you didn't fail anything, I think that's, and even if you do fail one or two and remediate, like there's a little more wiggle room there. I think the most important thing with your rotation is actually your comments. Like if your school does like, oh, this person did XYZ, like I think those are very important because they will read through them and try to see like what kind of a person, what did you do? And so yeah, I would say like, and then step 2 grades is probably third somewhere. So slow, some networking, step 2, and then rotation is how I would rank it. I think like networking is really helpful because if they have a face to your name, it really helps them figure out like, oh, I remember she was really nice or he was really nice, that sort of a thing, like at conferences or something like that. So that's how I would do it.
I see some folks dropping their kind of hierarchies in the chat. With this in mind, and I guess we'll make this the last question. With this in mind, so many spots went unfilled this year. You guys on this panel are the curators of future EM match processes. How do you all think the match process for EM will change given the outcomes this year?
So I cannot say exactly why there were so many spots unfilled. Theories I've heard is the workforce paper causing a lot of people to apply less. I've also heard interview hoarding. I've also heard a couple theories, but what I think the focus is, the good news is that there seems to be already change happening. So like we were talking about earlier, the token thing, it is sometimes hard, like expressing to a program that you really like them. That is already now being worked on, which is, I think when I heard it, is like a big comfort because you're able to say to a program, I'm really interested in you. I also think like it's going to be a wake-up call probably for the program directors to kind of reevaluate, you know, what can we do? And so in some ways change is good, I would say. It is anxiety inducing, but I think a lot of people, like really qualified applicants match and the average applicants match, low, like, I don't want to say quality, like, you know, people like got scores like me, and actually like, and I didn't feel like I was like way up there. So I think that it wasn't that there was many people that went unmatched, but maybe somebody else could speak because I'll just keep going and going and going. Not really.
So looking at the numbers, because this is something I get very passionate about. So from the years of 2018, 2019, and 2022, those were all the exact same number of applicants who have applied to emergency medicine. So there's actually no like the idea of like, oh, 216 spots like went unfilled. This is not a reflection of people leaving emergency medicine. This is a reflection on the increase in the number of residency spots that have been created. So like, please, like, I encourage you guys to go and look at the joint statement that was just released from a whole slew of emergency medicine academics on the 2022 emergency medicine match, because you can see all those numbers. Now, last year, there was like 1,000 more applicants than we have ever seen in emergency medicine, which was a fluke. What do you do when you see like a fluke number in research? We go, that's a lot outlier. Like that's not the actual trend that we're seeing in emergency medicine. And so the number of people who actually applied this year is normal. Like there wasn't like an actually like drastic decrease. I mean, it may be by like 50 people, but like it wasn't actually as significant as people think it is. So when you guys see that like 216 number, don't be like, oh my God, people are panicking. Medicine in general, this is not just emergency medicine. This is medicine in general, where people are experiencing, they're paying attention to burnout, fatigue, like being treated very poorly by these corporate conglomerates that are essentially taking over healthcare. This is not just us. So like, it doesn't matter if you go to internal medicine, family medicine, surgery, like psychiatry, it's all of medicine is experiencing this. And so I encourage you guys to, again, go back, look at the 2022 match, look at the data and just go, all right, I don't know, just familiarize yourself with the data, because again, it's not just emergency medicine. We are all going to be facing this if we don't actually pay attention to the numbers that are going on.
I like her answer better, and it sounds like you do know what you're talking about.
I dropped the ASAP statement in the chat for anyone who is interested. I believe that this might be a spoiler alert, but AEM is also working on their own kind of statement to subsidize that statement. So there's a lot of people are talking about it. Continue to read up on what everyone's saying, form your own opinions, look at the data. This specialty is still amazing. And if it's what you all want to do, you will match and you will be wonderful EM doctors. I believe in all of you.
I honestly think that is a great way for us to wrap up this panel. Um, you know, I want to thank the panelists. You know, drop a hand clap emoji in the chat, drop a flower, drop a bouquet emoji in the chat. I want to thank the panelists for giving, you know, very, very honest, candid feedback about their residency match experience. I want to congratulate you all. Y'all are awesome. Y'all did it. Woohoo. Pop bottles of champagne. I want to tell the folks that's on the line right now, you can do it too. And you definitely will do it sooner than I will. Your time will come. So make sure you keep your head in the game. You focus more on being a good doctor, and you know those characteristics that really will help you shine on the floor. Those characteristics that really help keep the patient at its center. Thank you for joining us. We'll be doing more things like this. We hope you stay connected. This is your Medical Student Council. See you at Scientific Assembly. The link is in the chat. You can Google AAEM Scientific Assembly. I'll be there. It's been great. Peace.